Hello, today we're going to take a look at Norwegian cap badges, more specifically the button and cockade combination, colloquially called Luestolpe, which translates to cap pole, because it's shaped like a pole, kind of. So the history behind these starts in the later half of the 1800s. You had at that point several kepis in use service, and with those you would have, just to use as an example, would have sort of this sort of combination of a button at the bottom and a cockade at the top. The motif on the button was a little bit different. This came later on, but like this was part of the kepi, so to say, on the front. So you would have the lacing and the button and lacing, the cockade and the button, sorry, on the front, directly sewn onto the front of the kepi. But you also had the only headwear I can think of was the fur cap, where you would put like this as a unit on the fur cap. The cockades were a little bit bigger back then. From all the photos I've seen, they look like this, where you have this layered sort of fabric, and in the regulation it's called a pressed silk. Of course, these modern ones are not silk. They're some sort of, I don't know what to call them, some sort of fabric. But that's what they're called, pressed silk. And later on, in the early part of the 1900s, the new mountain grey uniforms were adopted, and in which these would be expanded to use on the field cap for officers, but on the kepis they continue to be separate bits all put together on the kepi. Later on, in 1935, 1 year after the 1934 uniform was adopted, a special kind of ski cap was approved for use for officers. Basically a slightly fancier version of the field cap, where you would put this on as a unit, and I have a photo of me wearing one of those caps. It's a reproduction, but it still shows what it would have looked like. Of course, during the war, they continued to use these on field service caps and service caps, actually. I'm going to show you what a field service cap would have looked like. This is reproduction, post-war cap badge, but demonstrates the purpose. Put on the front like this. Oh, and by the way, privates would not get the cap badge. Oh, sorry, the badge as a unit. You would have one or two large buttons at the front here. Sorry, two small or one large button at the front here. And that's basically, these are for officers and NCOs, basically. But I'll explain a bit more about that later. Oh, and as I said, they were used on peaked caps up until 1957 or 58, when a new kind of badge for the peaked cap was adopted. But these stayed in service on the field cap in army use up until 1975, and that's basically the end of the use of these kinds of badges in the army. However, the Air Force continued to use these, and these two are Air Force. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. They are still in use on the field service cap, or the side cap, or whatever you want to call it, like this. Oops. I'm going to come back to this later. And that's basically the only place these types of cap badges are still in service in Norwegian use. So that's a quick rundown on the history. Now let's talk a little bit about what the different colors and the different buttons mean. So since the earliest one I have are from World War II, which is this and this, I'm going to have to find some photos of pre-World War II badges to show you, or drawings or whatever. And basically, if you were an NCO, you would get colored stripes, or lacing, if you will, on the sides here. If you were an officer, you would get silver, or in some cases gold, depending on branch. And I'm not going to get into it because it changed a little bit, the gold and the silver throughout the years. But basically, gold or silver, that's for officers from the rank of Fenrik, or second lieutenant, up until colonel. And then you also have, for generals, you have either, I'm just going to use this because I don't have a general's badge. You would have either two thick gold lacing, or just one really, really broad gold lacing. Of course, I don't have one of those because those are exceedingly rare and very expensive, and I wouldn't really have any use for it anyways. And just to show you guys, of course, the only the Army and the Air Force use these, and as you can obviously tell, the backing will be blue on Air Force or khaki or green on the Army ones. Yeah, continuing on, we have, just using these two as an example, this is a World War II dated one, this is a post-war one. As I said, NCOs would use this is specifically for sergeants. Corporals generally don't get it until very recently, but I'll get back to that later. Corporals would just have the button and the cockade and not the lacing connecting these two. And if we take the World War II one, we can compare. You can see the shape of the lion is a little bit different. It's a bit more old-fashioned than on here. This happened in the late 50s or early 60s, I'm not really sure, but it is a bit cool to see the difference there. And obviously the exact details on the on the red parts here will be different, and the shininess of the lion and all kinds of things, but basically red background, gold line, and that applies to all branches. There's no difference there. And if we in fact go back to the sergeant one, theoretically, if you were a sergeant in, for example, the artillery, you will get a different button. This is for infantry, but during the war they only used lion buttons. They didn't have any other buttons. But as you of course can tell, the cockades vary a little bit. There's not really any rhyme or reason behind it. Just different styles, whatever the tailor had available at the time. And you also see, if you can find it, and you also have this. You see this on some examples, but it's not very common to see really. But it does show up at the time. Just so you have an example of it, this is a modern field service cap or side cap of the Norwegian Air Force for privates, and as you can see, there's no bridge connecting the cockade and the button. In the last 5 or 10 years, they introduced a new type of badge with only one silver lacing, presumably because they wanted to have some difference between more fresh officers and officers above the rank of major. I'm not actually sure on that, so I'm going to double check to see exactly which ranks get this. But basically, in recent years, you only get 2 lacings if you are above a certain rank. And also, enlisted personnel get these that were traditionally only for sergeants. So now both sergeants and enlisted personnel get these. And by the way, Norway has a conscript army, so enlisted personnel are regarded a bit more highly than conscripts. So that's probably why they wanted to get this for enlisted personnel. So that's really it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really like this sort of cap badge. It's certainly not unique to Norway. Of course, Sweden and Denmark has had similar things, and also other countries that I can't think of in a hurry. But yeah, I really do like this style. It's just a shame that it's not more common in use these days. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.